The morning sun cast long shadows across New Seattle as Adrian Chen walked through the Pearl District with his son, Lucas. The year was 2287 and Earth had changed beyond recognition since humanity joined the Galactic Coalition 50 years ago. Towering buildings stretched toward the sky with holographic advertisements flickering between them, and alien visitors walked alongside humans on the busy streets. Adrian barely noticed any of it anymore because this was his normal life now, and he had grown used to sharing his world with beings from distant stars. Adrian was a billionaire who made his fortune in quantum computing and alien technology integration. His company had revolutionized how humans and aliens communicated and traded across the galaxy. But all his wealth and success meant nothing 3 years ago when his wife Catherine died in a shuttle accident. The pain of that loss still haunted him every single day, and he had thrown himself into raising their son, Lucas, alone with only nannies and staff to help him manage. Lucas was 5 years old now, with bright, curious eyes and dark hair like his mother. The boy held his father's hand as they walked past expensive shops and restaurants that catered to both human and alien clientele. Adrian had promised to take Lucas to the new virtual reality arcade that had just opened, and the child was excited about trying the alien games that his friends at school had been talking about. They approached the transit station where sleek magnetic trains arrived and departed every few minutes, carrying passengers to different parts of the sprawling city. The station was crowded with morning commuters and tourists and street vendors selling food from a dozen different worlds. Adrian guided Lucas through the crowd, keeping a protective hand on his son's shoulder. Because the city could be overwhelming even for adults, that was when everything changed in a single impossible moment. Lucas suddenly pulled free from his father's grip and ran forward. Before Adrian could stop him, the boy moved with purpose, weaving between the legs of surprised pedestrians as Adrian called out for him to stop. Lucas ran straight toward a woman sitting against the station wall, and Adrian's heart pounded with fear as he chased after his son through the crowd. The woman was, homeless, and that much was clear from her appearance. She sat on a piece of cardboard with a small handwritten sign asking for help. Her clothes were tattered and dirty, and her hair was unkempt and tangled. She was a black woman in her early 40s, though it was hard to tell her exact age because the streets had worn her down. Her face was gaunt from malnutrition, and her eyes had that distant look that Adrian had seen in too many people who had given up on life. Lucas stopped directly in front of her and pointed at her with his small hand. The child's voice rang out clear and certain, cutting through the noise of the busy station. "Mommy!" The word hit Adrian like a physical blow, and his vision blurred at the edges. His heart felt like it stopped beating for several seconds as his mind tried to process what his son had just said. It was impossible and completely insane, and there was no logical reason for Lucas to say such a thing. Catherine had been Asian and European in descent, with pale skin and delicate features. This woman looked nothing like her, and Adrian's rational mind knew that his son must be confused or playing some kind of game. But Lucas wasn't playing, and the certainty in the child's voice was absolute. The boy reached toward the woman with both hands, making the gesture he used to make when he wanted his mother to pick him up. "Mommy," he said again, and there were tears forming in his eyes now. The homeless woman looked terrified and confused as she pressed herself back against the wall. She shook her head and tried to wave the child away with trembling hands. "No, baby, I'm not your mama," she said in a hoarse voice that spoke of years without proper care. "You got the wrong person." Adrian stumbled backward as the world seemed to tilt around him. The sounds of the station became distant and muffled, like he was underwater. His breathing became shallow and rapid as shock and grief and confusion overwhelmed his normally controlled mind. Catherine was dead, and he had buried her 3 years ago and attended her memorial service with hundreds of other mourners. He had grieved for her every day since then, and slowly learned to function without her in his life. But Lucas had never been wrong about his mother, and the boy had cried for weeks after she died. Even now, 3 years later, Lucas still talked about Catherine and kept her photograph by his bed. The child's memories of her should have been fading by now, but they seemed as strong as ever. And now Lucas was pointing at a complete stranger and calling her by that sacred name. Adrian's vision darkened at the edges and his legs gave out beneath him. He heard people shouting and felt hands catching him as he fell, but everything seemed very far away. The last thing he saw before consciousness left him was Lucas, still reaching toward the homeless woman with absolute conviction in his young face. When Adrian's eyes closed, the busy station continued around him and security personnel rushed forward to help. Someone called for medical assistance while others tried to comfort the confused child. The homeless woman sat frozen against the wall with wide, frightened eyes as she watched the wealthy man collapse onto the pavement. She had no idea who these people were or why the child had called her mother. Her name was Diane Morrison as far as she knew, though even that felt uncertain sometimes. She had been living on the streets for 3 years with no memory of her life before that. Sometimes she had dreams of another existence, but they faded like smoke when she woke. All she knew was hunger and cold and the endless struggle to survive one more day. But something about the child's voice had struck a chord deep inside her mind, and for just a moment she felt an overwhelming surge of recognition and love. Then it was gone, leaving only confusion and fear in its wake. Diane pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself and wished these people would go away, so she could return to her invisible existence. She had no way of knowing that her life was about to change forever, or that the impossible truth would soon come to light. Adrian woke in a private medical facility with white walls and the soft hum of advanced equipment surrounding him. His head throbbed with a dull ache and his mouth felt dry as cotton. For a moment he couldn't remember what had happened or why he was lying in a hospital bed. Then the memory crashed back into his consciousness like a wave, and he sat up so quickly that his vision swam. Dr. Helen Rivera stood beside his bed checking readings on a holographic display that floated in the air. She was a woman in her 50s with gray streaking through her black hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen everything. She had been Adrian's personal physician for 10 years and had helped him through the darkest days after Catherine's death. "Easy, Adrian," Helen said as she gently pushed him back against the pillows. "You suffered from acute stress and shock and your blood pressure dropped dangerously low. You're lucky you didn't hit your head when you fell." "Where's Lucas?" Adrian demanded as he tried to sit up again. His son was his first thought and his only concern in that moment. "He's right here," Helen assured him and stepped aside to reveal Lucas sitting in a chair beside the bed. The boy looked unusually quiet and solemn for a child his age. His small hands were folded in his lap and his eyes were fixed on his father's face with an intensity that seemed far too mature. Adrian reached out and Lucas immediately climbed onto the bed to curl up against his father's side. Adrian wrapped his arms around his son and felt the boy's steady heartbeat against his chest. For a long moment neither of them spoke and Adrian just held his child close. "That was Mommy," Lucas said quietly into the silence. His voice was certain and calm, like he was stating a simple fact that everyone should already know. Adrian felt his throat tighten with emotion, and he didn't know what to say. His son was only 5 years old and couldn't possibly understand how impossible his claim was. Catherine had been dead for 3 years and her body had been identified after the shuttle accident. There had been DNA confirmation and everything. The woman at the transit station was a complete stranger who looked nothing like his wife. But Lucas had never lied to him, and children sometimes saw things that adults missed. Adrian's logical mind fought against his heart, and he didn't know which one to trust. "Lucas," Adrian began carefully, "that woman doesn't look like Mommy, and Mommy died 3 years ago. You remember that, don't you?" "I remember," Lucas said, and there was sadness in his young voice. "But that was still Mommy, and I know it was." Helen cleared her throat and Adrian looked up at her. The doctor's expression was troubled and she seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "Adrian, I've known Lucas since he was born, and I've never seen him confused about his mother. Children his age can have vivid imaginations, but they don't usually make mistakes about their primary caregivers." "You're not suggesting..." Adrian started but couldn't finish the sentence because it was too absurd. "I'm not suggesting anything," Helen said firmly, "but I think you need to find that woman and get some answers. Even if it's just to help Lucas understand why he reacted that way." Against every logical instinct Adrian had, he found himself agreeing. He had his security team locate Diane Morrison, and it wasn't difficult because she was still sitting at the transit station. She hadn't moved from her spot against the wall, and seemed afraid that the earlier incident might have gotten her in trouble. Somehow, 2 hours later, Adrian stood in front of her again with Lucas holding his hand. The boy immediately tried to reach for her, but Adrian held him back gently. Diane looked even more frightened in the daylight and she seemed ready to run if anyone made a sudden move. "I'm not here to cause you any problems," Adrian said, as he tried to keep his voice calm and non-threatening. "But my son seems to think he knows you and I need to understand why." I don't know your boy, Diane said quickly. Her voice shook and her eyes darted around looking for escape routes. I never seen him before today and I don't know why he said that. I believe you, Adrian said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. But I'd like to make you an offer and I promise you'll be compensated fairly regardless of the outcome. Diane's expression shifted from fear to suspicion. She had lived on the streets long enough to know that nothing came for free, and wealthy people didn't help homeless folks out of kindness. What kind of offer? She asked warily. Come to my estate, Adrian said. Get cleaned up and receive a full medical examination. I'll pay you 10,000 credits just for your time. If you're running some kind of scam, I'll prosecute you to the full extent of the law. But if you're genuine, then maybe we can figure out why my son reacted the way he did. 10,000 credits was more money than Diane had seen in years. It was enough to get her off the streets and into a proper apartment with food and clothes, and maybe even a chance at a normal life. She knew she should be suspicious and that this whole situation felt wrong somehow. But desperation made people take risks they wouldn't normally consider. Why would you do this? Diane asked as she searched Adrian's face for deception. Because my son has never been wrong about his mother, Adrian said simply, and because I need to know the truth even if it destroys me. Diane looked at Lucas and the boy smiled at her with such pure love and recognition that her heart ached. She didn't understand what was happening, but some deep part of her responded to that child's face. Against her better judgment and with nothing left to lose, she nodded slowly. Okay, she said quietly. I'll come with you. Adrian's security team arrived in a sleek black vehicle and helped Diane into the back seat. She looked terrified as the car lifted off the ground and joined the flow of air traffic above the city. Lucas sat beside her and kept trying to hold her hand, but Adrian gently redirected his son's attention. The ride to Adrian's estate took 20 minutes and Diane stared out the window at a world she barely recognized. She had vague memories of flying vehicles and tall buildings, but everything felt new and overwhelming. When they landed at the massive compound with its gardens and security gates, Diane realized just how wealthy this man truly was. She was led to a private medical facility on the grounds where Dr. Helen Rivera waited with her team. The doctor smiled kindly at Diane and explained that they would run some tests and examinations, but nothing would hurt. Diane nodded numbly and let herself be guided into the examination room. As the medical team began their work, Adrian waited outside with Lucas, the boy leaned against his father and whispered, "You'll see, Daddy, that's Mommy." Adrian closed his eyes and prayed that his son was either completely wrong or somehow impossibly right. He wasn't sure which outcome would be worse. Dr. Helen Rivera stared at the holographic display showing Diane Morrison's test results and felt her blood run cold. In 30 years of medical practice, including 15 years working with alien biology, she had never seen anything like this. Her hands trembled slightly as she expanded the genetic analysis and triple-checked the readings because what she was seeing should not be possible. Diane sat in the examination room wrapped in a clean medical gown and looking more confused than frightened now. The woman had been scanned and tested for the past 3 hours, and the medical team had been thorough but gentle. She had been given food and water and allowed to shower for the first time in months. With the dirt washed away, her features were more defined, though she still looked nothing like the photographs Helen had seen of Catherine Zhao Chen, but the test results told a different story, entirely. Helen called Adrian into her private office and closed the door behind them. She pulled up the genetic analysis on the large display screen and took a deep breath before speaking. Adrian, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I've verified these results multiple times. Just tell me, Adrian said as he gripped the edge of her desk. His knuckles were white with tension and his jaw was clenched tight. Diane Morrison's DNA shows markers that should not exist in any human born on Earth, Helen began. She highlighted several sections of the genetic code on the screen. These sequences here and here are Zytherian in origin. The Zytherians are known across the galaxy for their advanced genetic engineering, but they're also extremely secretive about their technology. What does that mean? Adrian asked, though he was already starting to understand and the implications terrified him. It means someone used Zytherian biotechnology on this woman, Helen said carefully. They didn't just alter her appearance, Adrian. They rewrote her entire genetic expression at the cellular level. Her DNA has been fundamentally changed, but there are traces of the original code still present in her cells. Adrian felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath him. "Can you recover the original DNA pattern?" he asked in a voice that barely qualified as a whisper. Helen nodded slowly and pulled up another display. "I ran a reconstruction algorithm using the trace markers. It took the computer 2 hours to process, but the results are conclusive." She pressed a button and a genetic profile appeared on the screen. "The original DNA belongs to Catherine Zhao Chen, your wife." The room seemed to spin around Adrian, and he had to sit down before his legs gave out again. "That's impossible," he said automatically. "Catherine died in the shuttle accident, and we had DNA confirmation." "The DNA confirmation was accurate for the body they found," Helen said gently. "But what if Catherine wasn't on that shuttle when it crashed? What if she was taken before the accident?" Adrian's mind raced through the possibilities, and none of them made sense. "Why would anyone do this to her?" he demanded. "Why change her entire genetic structure and dump her on the streets with no memory?" "I don't know," Helen admitted. "But there's more. I attempted to scan Diane's neural pathways using standard medical imaging, but I encountered something unusual. There are biological locks embedded in her brain. They're suppressing her memories and her cognitive functions." Helen pulled up brain scans that showed normal human neural structure, overlaid with something that looked almost like a computer program. Threads of alien biotechnology wove through Diane's brain tissue, creating barriers and blocks that prevented certain pathways from activating. "I've seen similar technology used by the Cytherians for medical purposes," Helen explained. "They use biolocks to help patients recover from trauma by temporarily suppressing painful memories. But these locks are different. They're designed to be permanent, and they're much more aggressive than anything I've seen used therapeutically." "Can you remove them?" Adrian asked desperately. "I can try," Helen said, "but it's extremely dangerous. The locks are integrated with her neural tissue, and removing them incorrectly could cause permanent brain damage or death. We'd need specialized equipment and probably consultation with Cytherian medical experts." "Do it," Adrian said immediately. "Use whatever resources you need and contact whoever you have to. If there's even a chance that woman is Catherine, then I have to know." Helen nodded and began making arrangements. She contacted specialists across Earth and even reached out to Cytherian medical consultants through diplomatic channels. Most of the alien doctors said the procedure was impossible and refused to even attempt it. But Helen was determined, and she assembled a team of human neurologists who were willing to try. Meanwhile, Adrian sat with Diane in a comfortable room and tried to explain what they had discovered. Diane listened with growing horror as he told her about the genetic alterations and the neural locks. She touched her own face as if seeing it for the first time, and tears ran down her cheeks. "I don't remember anything before 3 years ago," Diane said softly. "I woke up in an alley with no identification and no memory of how I got there. I've been trying to remember who I was, but there's just emptiness." "Do you want to know the truth?" Adrian asked, "even if it means risking the procedure?" Diane was quiet for a long moment as she considered the question. She looked at Lucas, who was sleeping on a couch nearby with his small body curled up peacefully. Something about the child made her heart ache with a longing she couldn't explain. "That boy called me his mother," Diane said finally, "and when he did, I felt something. Just for a second, there was this overwhelming feeling of love and recognition. Then it was gone, like someone had switched off a light inside my head. I need to know why I felt that." "The procedure is dangerous," Adrian warned. "You could die or end up with permanent brain damage." "I'm already dead," Diane said with sad certainty. "The woman I was before is gone, and the woman I am now isn't really living. If there's a chance to find out who I really am, then I'll take that risk." Adrian felt a surge of respect for this woman's courage. She had every reason to refuse and take the money he had offered and disappear. But instead, she was willing to risk everything for the truth. Dr. Helen Rivera prepared the medical bay for the most complicated procedure of her career. She had assembled a team of 5 specialists, and they had spent hours studying the Cytherian biolocks and planning their approach. The alien consultants had provided some guidance, though they insisted the procedure would fail. But Helen had learned something important during humanity's time in the Galactic Coalition. Older alien races often became limited by their own expertise. They knew so much about what was possible that they stopped looking for new solutions. Humans were still young enough and desperate enough to try things that more experienced species would never attempt. As Diane was prepared for surgery, Adrian sat outside the medical bay with Lucas. The boy was awake now and seemed to understand that something important was happening. Is Mommy going to be okay? Lucas asked with worry in his young voice. I hope so, Adrian said honestly. But we won't know for sure until the doctors are finished. Lucas nodded solemnly and took his father's hand. Together they waited while the medical team attempted the impossible. While Dr. Helen Rivera and her team worked on preparing Diane for the dangerous procedure, Adrian made a series of calls that he should have made 3 years ago. His grief had blinded him back then, and he had accepted the official story about Catherine's death without question. But now, with the impossible evidence in front of him, he was done being passive. Adrian's first call was to Gregory Hayes, an old friend who worked in Earth's intelligence services. Gregory had climbed the ranks over the years and now held a position that gave him access to classified information. When Adrian explained what he had discovered, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Adrian, Gregory said finally with warning clear in his voice. You need to drop this right now and forget everything you found. Like hell I will, Adrian shot back. My wife is alive, Gregory, and someone did this to her. I want to know who and why. Another long silence followed, and Adrian could hear Gregory typing on a keyboard. I'm sending you a secure file, Gregory said quietly. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, and sharing it could cost me my career. But you deserve to know the truth. A holographic file appeared in Adrian's vision, and he opened it with shaking hands. What he read made his blood boil with rage that threatened to consume him entirely. 3 years ago, the diplomatic shuttle carrying Catherine and 15 other passengers had been attacked by the Krev Syndicate. The Krev were a criminal organization that operated across multiple star systems and specialized in illegal biotechnology and memory manipulation. They were known for kidnapping victims and using them in horrific experiments. The official story had been that the shuttle was destroyed and all passengers killed in the attack. Earth's government had held memorial services and paid compensation to the families. But that was a lie constructed to avoid a massive diplomatic incident. The truth was that several passengers had been kidnapped alive, including Catherine. Earth's intelligence services had known about the survivors but made a calculated decision not to launch a rescue operation. The Krev had threatened to execute all hostages if any rescue attempt was made, and the government had been in the middle of delicate treaty negotiations with the Galactic Coalition, so they had sacrificed Catherine and the others to protect larger political interests. Adrian's hands clenched into fists as he read through the classified reports. The intelligence services had tracked the hostages for several months as the Krev moved them between different facilities. Then the signals had gone dead, and the assumption was that the experiments had killed the subjects. The case was quietly closed, and the families were never told the truth. You let her die, Adrian said in a voice filled with cold fury. You knew she was alive and you did nothing. It wasn't my decision, Gregory said defensively. I was lower ranked back then and didn't have access to this information until much later. By the time I found out the hostages were presumed dead, what were the Krev doing to them? Adrian demanded as he forced himself to keep reading. The reports described experiments using stolen Zetherian biotechnology. The Krev had been attempting to create what they called blank slate agents. The idea was to completely rewrite a person's genetic code and neural pathways, so they could be given new identities and memories. These agents could then be inserted into any society with perfect cover, because even DNA testing would show them as different people. The experiments had been largely failures. Most subjects died during the genetic rewriting process because human biology wasn't compatible with Zetherian technology. A few survived but became vegetables with no cognitive function at all. Catherine had been one of the rare cases where the subject survived, with basic brain function intact but all memories suppressed. The Krev had dumped the failed experiments on various planets to cover their tracks. Catherine had been left on Earth with her appearance completely altered and no way to identify who she had been. For 3 years she had wandered the streets while Adrian grieved and her son grew up without her. There's more, Gregory said reluctantly. The Krev Syndicate still has operatives tracking their former test subjects. They can't afford to have any of their experiments discovered because it would expose their entire operation. If they find out that Catherine has been identified and is being treated, they'll send people to eliminate her and everyone who knows about her. Let them try, Adrian said with deadly calm. I've got enough security to handle whatever they send. You don't understand, Gregory insisted. The Krev have resources and connections throughout the galaxy. They can send mercenaries with advanced weapons and they won't hesitate to kill civilians. You need to hand Catherine over to government protection immediately. The government had its chance to protect her 3 years ago, Adrian said coldly. Now she's under my protection and I'm not trusting her to the people who left her to die. Adrian ended the call and immediately contacted the head of his security team. Lisa Grant was a former Earth Defense Force commander who had served in multiple conflicts during humanity's early years in the Galactic Coalition. She was tough and competent and completely loyal to Adrian because he had given her a job when the military had forced her into early retirement. We need to go to full defensive protocols, Adrian told her as he explained the situation. The Krev Syndicate may be coming for us and they won't care about collateral damage. Lisa's expression hardened and she nodded once. I'll activate all security systems and recall the full team. How long do we have before they might arrive? I don't know, Adrian admitted, but we have to assume they're already moving. The intelligence services have been monitoring the Krev for years, so there's a chance our activities have already been flagged. Lisa immediately began issuing orders to her security personnel. The estate's defensive systems powered up with energy shields and automated weapons platforms coming online. Additional guards were stationed at every entrance in the airspace. Above the compound was declared a no-fly zone. Adrian returned to the medical bay where Dr. Helen Rivera was reviewing the final preparations for Diane's procedure. He pulled her aside and explained about the Krev threat. Helen's face went pale, but she didn't back down. We need to do the procedure now, she said firmly. If the Krev are coming, then we can't wait. Catherine's memories might contain information about their operations that could help bring them down. It's too dangerous, Adrian protested. We should evacuate everyone to a secure location. There is no secure location if the Krev are determined to find us, Helen countered. Our best chance is to complete the procedure and hope that Catherine can remember something useful. Besides, she already agreed to the risk. Adrian knew she was right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. He looked through the window at Diane lying on the medical table surrounded by equipment and monitors. She looked so small and vulnerable, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to lose Catherine all over again. Lucas appeared beside him and tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, the boy said quietly. The bad people are coming, aren't they? Adrian looked down at his son and wondered how children always seem to know things they shouldn't. Yes, buddy, he admitted. But we're not going to let them hurt anyone. Mommy is strong, Lucas said with absolute confidence. She'll be okay. Adrian hoped his son was right because he didn't think he could survive losing Catherine twice. He gave orders for Lisa to lock down the entire compound and prepare for possible assault. Then he settled in to wait while the medical team began the most dangerous procedure of their careers, and an unknown threat moved closer with every passing moment. The procedure had to be completed and Catherine's memories had to be recovered before the Krev arrived. Everything depended on human determination and skill overcoming technology that alien experts had declared impossible to defeat. It was a very human thing to attempt, and Adrian prayed it would be enough. Dr. Helen Rivera stood at the head of the medical table and looked at the team of specialists she had assembled. 5 of the best human neurologists and geneticists on Earth stood ready to attempt something that every Zetherian expert had declared impossible. The alien consultants had been polite but firm in their assessment that the biolocks could not be safely removed without killing the patient. But Helen had not asked them if it could be done. She had asked them how the locks worked and what principles governed their function. Then she and her team had spent hours analyzing that information and looking for weaknesses that the Zetherians had never considered. The problem was that Zetherian technology was designed for Zetherian biology. Their neural pathways were more rigid and structured than human brains. The biolocks worked by creating permanent barriers in specific locations that could never be bypassed. For a Zetherian, this would indeed be impossible to overcome. But human brains were different in one crucial way: neuroplasticity. The human brain had a remarkable ability to adapt and create new pathways when old ones were blocked. It was why humans could recover from strokes and brain injuries that would permanently disable other species. Helen's team had discovered that Catherine's brain had been fighting the biolocks for 3 years, slowly trying to route around the barriers. The locks are like walls built across specific roads, Helen explained to her team as they made final preparations. The Zetherians assumed that blocking those roads would permanently prevent access. But Catherine's brain has been trying to build new roads around the walls. We can see the incomplete pathways here and here. She pointed to the brain scans showing faint neural connections that hadn't existed in the original Etherean design. Catherine's human biology had been attempting to heal itself, even though it didn't understand what was wrong. Our approach is going to be different from what the Ethereans suggested. Helen continued, we're not going to try to break down the walls. Instead, we're going to help Catherine's brain finish building the new roads. We'll use targeted neural stimulation to strengthen these pathways while simultaneously weakening the biolocks. It was the approach that combined human understanding of neuroplasticity with careful application of alien technology. The Zytherians had never attempted such a method because their own biology didn't work that way. It took a human perspective to see the solution. Dr. Peter Walsh, a neurologist who specialized in brain trauma recovery, nodded his approval. We'll need to work in stages, he said. Too much stimulation at once could overwhelm her system. I suggest we focus on the most recent memory blocks first and work our way backward. Agreed, Helen said. Let's begin. Diane had been given a mild sedative to keep her calm, but she remained conscious throughout the procedure. The team needed her awake so they could monitor her responses and adjust their approach in real time. She lay very still on the table with her eyes closed and her breathing steady. Helen placed a neural interface device on Diane's head. It looked like a crown made of silver threads that connected to monitoring equipment. The device could both read neural activity and deliver precise electrical stimulation to specific areas of the brain. Diane, can you hear me? Helen asked gently. Yes, Diane replied in a quiet voice. We're going to start the procedure now, Helen explained. You might experience some discomfort or confusion as memories begin to surface. Try to stay calm and let them come naturally. Don't fight the process. I understand, Diane said, though her voice trembled slightly. Helen activated the neural interface and began with the lowest possible stimulation level. On the monitors, the team could see Catherine's brain activity change as new pathways started to activate. Diane's breathing quickened and her eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids. Increasing stimulation to Area 7, Peter Walsh announced as he adjusted the settings. Neural activity is responding well. Diane's hands clenched into fists and she made a small sound of distress. Images were flooding her mind now, fragmented and confusing. She saw a shuttle interior and felt terror as something went wrong. She saw faces she didn't recognize but somehow knew were important. She heard a child crying and felt desperate need to reach him. Easy, Diane, Helen said soothingly. Just let the memories come. Don't try to organize them yet. The team worked with careful precision, strengthening neural pathways one section at a time. It was slow and delicate work that required constant adjustment. Each time they activated a new pathway, they had to monitor Catherine's vital signs and ensure her brain wasn't being overwhelmed by the sudden influx of suppressed information. Hours passed as the procedure continued. Adrian waited outside the medical bay with Lucas sleeping against his shoulder. Security reports came in regularly from Lisa Grant, who had the entire estate on high alert. So far, there were no signs of Krev activity, but everyone knew that could change at any moment. Inside the medical bay, Diane was experiencing 3 years' worth of suppressed memories flooding back into her consciousness. She saw herself as Catherine Zhao Chen, diplomat and xenolinguist. She remembered her wedding to Adrian and the joy of holding baby Lucas for the first time. She remembered the shuttle trip that was supposed to be routine and the terror when the Krev attacked. She remembered being dragged from the wreckage by figures in dark armor. She remembered a laboratory with cold metal tables and alien equipment. She remembered pain that went beyond physical as her very DNA was rewritten. She remembered the moment when her memories were locked away and she became no one. Neural activity is spiking, Peter Walsh warned as alarms began to sound. Her brain is trying to process too much at once. Reduce stimulation by 30%, Helen ordered quickly. We need to slow this down. But something unexpected was happening. Zytherian biolocks were not just weakening, they were beginning to integrate with Catherine's reactivated neural pathways. The alien technology that was supposed to suppress her was instead being absorbed and incorporated into her brain's natural structure. This isn't in any of the literature, one of the specialists said with amazement in his voice. Her brain is actually adapting the Zytherian technology for its own use. Helen watched the scans with growing excitement and realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Catherine's human neuroplasticity wasn't just bypassing the biolocks, it was repurposing them. The suppression technology was being converted into enhancement technology. Her cognitive processing speed is increasing, Peter Walsh reported. She's integrating the neural modifications in ways the CREV never intended. The procedure that was supposed to simply restore Catherine's memories was instead creating something new. She would get her memories back, but she would also gain capabilities that no unmodified human possessed. Her brain would be able to process information faster and make connections that normally required computer assistance. It was the most human thing possible, taking something designed to harm and turning it into an advantage. As the hours stretched on, the procedure finally approached completion. The biolocks had been either bypassed or integrated, and Catherine's memories were flowing freely again. Dr. Helen Rivera reduced the neural stimulation to minimal levels and began the careful process of bringing her patient back to full consciousness. Diane's eyes opened, and for the first time in 3 years they were completely clear and aware. But the woman looking out through those eyes was no longer Diane Morrison. She was Catherine Zhao Chen, and she remembered everything. The morning after the attack, Earth Defense Force officers arrived at Adrian's estate to secure the captured CREV mercenaries and investigate the incident. News of the battle had spread quickly through official channels, and suddenly people who had ignored Adrian's questions 3 years ago were very interested in what had happened. Catherine sat in Adrian's study wearing clean clothes that actually fit her body and with her hair properly washed and styled for the first time in years. She looked different from how Adrian remembered her because the genetic changes were permanent, but her eyes held the sharp intelligence he had fallen in love with, and her voice carried the confidence of the woman who had been one of Earth's top diplomats. Gregory Hayes arrived personally to take statements, and his expression was a mixture of guilt and relief. He had been the one to warn Adrian about the CREV threat, and now he had to face the woman his organization had abandoned. Catherine, Gregory said awkwardly as he entered the study, "I cannot begin to apologize for what happened to you." "Then don't," Catherine replied coldly. "Apologies mean nothing when the people who were supposed to protect Earth citizens chose politics over lives." Gregory flinched but nodded in acceptance. "You're right, and nothing I say will change that. But I need to understand what happened during your captivity and what the CREV were trying to accomplish." Catherine spent the next 2 hours giving a detailed account of everything she could remember. The genetic modification process had been excruciating, and she had watched other test subjects die screaming as their bodies rejected the Zetherian technology. The CREV scientists had been trying to create perfect infiltration, agents who could pass any security screening, because their DNA would show them as completely different people. They wanted to place these agents in government positions and corporate leadership across the galaxy, Catherine explained. Imagine someone who looks and genetically tests as a trusted official but is actually a CREV operative with implanted memories and complete loyalty to the syndicate. Gregory's face went pale as he understood the implications. They could destabilize entire civilizations. That was the plan, Catherine confirmed. But the process kept failing. Human biology proved too adaptable and fought the modifications in ways they didn't anticipate. Most subjects died. The few who survived, like me, became useless to them because the memory suppression created amnesia, instead of allowing new memories to be implanted. She leaned forward with intensity in her eyes. But here's what the CREV didn't understand. Human neuroplasticity means our brains never stop trying to heal and adapt. For 3 years, my mind was fighting their locks and trying to remember who I was. When Dr. Rivera removed the locks, all those suppressed neural pathways activated at once. That's how you were able to command the defense so effectively, Gregory realized. Partially, Catherine agreed. But it's more than that. The Zetherian modifications that were supposed to suppress me have instead been integrated with my enhanced neural pathways. I can process information faster than any unmodified human. I can see patterns and make connections that would normally require computer assistance. She stood and walked to a holographic display showing data on the CREV syndicate. I spent 3 years in their facilities and watched their operations. I remember locations and protocols and command structures. Even though my conscious mind was locked away, my enhanced brain was still recording everything. Catherine pulled up star charts and marked 7 different systems. These are CREV operation centers. I can identify at least 40 key personnel and describe their security measures in detail. The CREV thought they erased a failed experiment, but they actually created the perfect weapon against themselves. Gregory stared at the intelligence treasure trove that Catherine was revealing. This was information that Earth intelligence had been trying to gather for years. This changes everything, he said quietly. Yes, it does, Catherine agreed. And I'm not letting this information disappear into classified files. The CREV syndicate has been operating with impunity for too long. They kidnapped and murdered innocent people, including children. They need to be stopped. The government will want to handle this quietly through official channels, Gregory warned. The government had its chance, Adrian interjected as he entered the study. They chose silence and diplomacy while Catherine suffered. Now we're doing things differently. Catherine smiled at her husband and took his hand. Adrian has connections throughout the business community and access to independent media outlets. We're going to expose the CREV operations publicly and force the Galactic Coalition to take action. That will cause a diplomatic incident, Gregory protested. Good, Catherine said firmly. The coalition needs to know that humanity won't tolerate this kind of abuse. We're not going to be the quiet newcomers who accept how things have always been done. We're going to demand better. Over the next week, Catherine and Adrian worked with legal experts and journalists to prepare a comprehensive release of information about the CREV syndicate. Catherine gave interviews where she appeared as herself despite her altered appearance and told her story with calm authority. Medical experts confirmed the Zetherian modifications in her DNA, and the evidence was undeniable. The galactic community reacted with shock as the story spread across hundreds of worlds. Many species had suspected the CREV of illegal activities, but had never seen such detailed proof. The fact that a human had survived and recovered from their experiments sparked intense scientific interest. Zetherian medical experts who had declared the biolock removal. Impossible contacted Dr. Helen Rivera demanding to know how she had achieved it. Helen's response was simple. We didn't try to do it the Zetherian way. We used human understanding of neuroplasticity and it worked. That simple statement became a rallying cry for human innovation. The older galactic races had accumulated so much knowledge that they sometimes became trapped by their own expertise. They knew too much about what was impossible and stopped looking for new solutions. Humans were still young enough and desperate enough to question everything. The Galactic Coalition Security Council called an emergency session to address the CREV threat. Catherine was invited to testify, and she stood before representatives of 100 different species to tell her story. She spoke in 6 different alien languages using her xenolinguist training and her enhanced cognitive abilities to ensure nothing was lost in translation. I stand before you not just as a victim but as proof of what humans can endure and overcome, Catherine told the assembled delegates. The CREV syndicate believed they could break me and turn me into a weapon. Instead, they gave me the tools to destroy their organization. She presented the intelligence she had gathered and outlined military operations that could dismantle the CREV network. But this isn't just about stopping one criminal group, she continued. This is about establishing that sentient beings have fundamental rights that cannot be violated regardless of political convenience. Earth's government failed to protect its citizens because they prioritized diplomatic relations over justice. That failure nearly destroyed my family. Catherine's voice remained steady, but her words carried weight that resonated through the chamber. Humanity is still new to this galactic community. We don't have the technology or resources of older civilizations, but we have something that seems to have been forgotten here. We have the stubborn refusal to accept that anyone is truly lost. We have the determination to save even one person that others write off as impossible. The chamber was silent as Catherine finished speaking. Then slowly one delegate stood to applaud, then another and another until the entire council was on their feet, showing respect in a dozen different cultural gestures. The coalition voted overwhelmingly to authorize military action against the CREV syndicate. Strike teams from multiple species coordinated the largest anti-trafficking operation in galactic history. Within months, all 7 major CREV facilities were raided and hundreds of victims were rescued. Catherine worked tirelessly with coalition medical teams to help other survivors recover. Her unique experience and enhanced abilities made her invaluable in understanding how to reverse the various modifications the CREV had performed. Not every victim could be saved, but more recovered than anyone had thought possible. Lucas watched his mother on news broadcasts across the galaxy and felt proud. His 5-year-old mind didn't understand all the politics, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had been right to recognize her. Love had transcended genetic manipulation and found what logic said was impossible. 6 months after Catherine's recovery, she stood in front of a memorial stone on Earth that bore her name among hundreds of others who had supposedly died in the shuttle attack. The memorial was a quiet place with gardens and reflecting pools, where families came to remember their lost loved ones. Catherine had avoided this place since her return because seeing her own name carved in stone felt too strange, but today she needed to be here. Adrian stood beside her with Lucas between them, holding both their hands. The boy had grown taller in the past months and was beginning to lose some of his baby features. He looked up at his mother's memorial stone with curiosity rather than sadness because for him, this was just another strange thing in a world full of strange things. "Why does it have your name, Mommy?" Lucas asked. "Because for 3 years everyone thought I was dead," Catherine explained gently. "And in a way I was. The person I used to be died when the Krev changed me. Diane Morrison lived on the streets and didn't know who she was. But you're not dead now," Lucas said with simple child logic. Catherine smiled and knelt down to her son's eye level. "No, baby, I'm not dead. But Diane was real too, and she suffered things that Catherine never could have survived. So I'm here to remember her." She stood and placed her hand on the memorial stone, feeling the cool granite under her palm. "I was one of the lucky ones," she said softly. 42 people were on that shuttle, and only 8 of us survived the Krev experiments. 5 of those died before we could rescue them. Only 3 of us made it home. Adrian wrapped his arm around her shoulders, offering silent support. The past months had been difficult as Catherine adjusted to her new reality. Her appearance had changed permanently because reversing the genetic modifications would be as dangerous as the original procedure. She looked like a different person, but inside she was still Catherine Zhao Chen. Most days she was fine with that. Some days she grieved for the face she used to have. "The memorial committee wants to know if you want your name removed," Adrian said carefully. "They said it's your choice." Catherine considered the question as she studied the names carved into the stone. Each one represented a life that had been cut short by violence and greed. Each one represented a family that had grieved. "Leave it," she decided. Catherine Zhao Chen died in that attack. I'm someone new now, someone made from both Catherine and Diane. She turned away from the memorial and looked at her family. Lucas smiled up at her with complete acceptance because children didn't care about things like genetic modifications.
Adrian's eyes held love that had survived 3 years of grief and impossible revelations.
They were her anchor to humanity. "Let's go home," Catherine said. They walked together through the memorial gardens toward the parking area where Lisa Grant waited with a security vehicle. Catherine's enhanced abilities had made her a target for various groups who wanted to study her or exploit her. She required protection now, though she had insisted on keeping the security team small and unobtrusive. As they drove back toward the estate, Catherine checked messages on her communication device. She had been appointed as Earth's special envoy for anti-trafficking operations, and the workload was enormous. The Galactic Coalition's raids on Krev facilities had rescued over 200 victims, but many needed extensive rehabilitation and medical treatment. Catherine had made it her mission to ensure that every survivor received the care and support they deserved. She used her diplomatic skills and her enhanced cognitive abilities to coordinate between different species and overcome bureaucratic obstacles. When governments moved too slowly, she went to the media and applied public pressure until things got done. She had become famous across the galaxy as the human who survived the impossible. But Catherine didn't care about fame. She cared about the scared, confused people who woke up in medical facilities with no memory of who they were. She cared about the families who had grieved for lost loved ones and now had a chance to get them back. Adrian's technology company had pivoted to focus on counter-trafficking, technology and developing methods to reverse biolocks and genetic modifications. He worked closely with Dr. Helen Rivera, who had become the leading expert on treating Krev victims. Together, they were pioneering techniques that combined human medical knowledge with alien technology in ways that neither could achieve alone. The work was slow and difficult because every victim was unique. But the success rate kept improving, and that was what mattered. Lives that the older galactic races had written off as lost, were being saved by human determination and innovation. Lucas attended a school that taught both human and alien students, and he had become something of a celebrity among his classmates. The other children were fascinated by his mother's story and constantly asked him questions. Lucas handled the attention with remarkable maturity and always insisted that the real hero was his mother, not him. But Catherine knew better. Lucas had been the one who recognized her when everyone else saw only a homeless stranger. His 5-year-old intuition had accomplished what sophisticated sensors and security systems had missed. He had known his mother's soul despite every physical change because love transcended genetics. That evening, the Chen family gathered in their home for dinner. It was a simple meal because Catherine had spent 3 years eating from garbage bins and restaurant scraps. She still couldn't stomach fancy elaborate dishes and preferred basic foods that reminded her she was safe and cared for. They ate together in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Lucas's chatter about his day at school. After dinner, Catherine read to Lucas from one of his favorite books while Adrian cleaned up in the kitchen. It was normal and domestic and utterly precious after everything they had been through. When Lucas was tucked into bed and sleeping peacefully, Catherine and Adrian sat together on their balcony looking out at the city lights. New Seattle glittered with human and alien technology blended together in a skyline that represented humanity's place among the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Adrian asked quietly. "Everything that happened and everything you've become." Catherine was silent for a long moment as she considered the question honestly. She had suffered things that no one should endure. She had lost 3 years of her life and her son's childhood. She had been transformed into someone else against her will, and would carry those scars forever. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. What happened to me was terrible, but I survived it, and now I can help others survive too. The Krev wanted to break me and use me. Instead, I became the weapon that destroyed them." She took Adrian's hand and interlaced their fingers, and I learned something important. I learned that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our intelligence. It's our stubborn refusal to give up. We don't accept impossible, and we don't abandon people that others write off as lost. That's what makes us special in this galaxy. Adrian agreed. The older races have forgotten how to hope. Catherine nodded and looked up at the stars where thousands of civilizations existed on distant worlds. We're teaching them to hope again. Every victim we rescue and every impossible recovery we achieve proves that giving up is not the only option. We're showing the galaxy that determination and compassion can overcome things that pure logic says are impossible. She thought about all the people she had met in the past months, victims who had suffered like she had and families who had grieved like Adrian had. She thought about the doctors and security personnel and diplomats who worked tirelessly to help. Most of them were human, but some were aliens who had been inspired by humanity's example. The Krev thought humans were soft because we're emotional, and we care about individuals rather than just populations, Catherine said. They thought our compassion was weakness, but they were wrong. Our compassion is what makes us strong. Adrian smiled and pulled her close. "I'm glad Lucas inherited that from you. He never stopped believing you were alive even when I had given up hope. His love was stronger than logic." "Children understand things that adults forget," Catherine said. "They know that the important parts of a person aren't just physical. Lucas recognized me because he knew me in ways that DNA tests could never measure." She stood and walked to the edge of the balcony, looking out at the city that was her home. Somewhere out there, other people were suffering and needed help. Tomorrow, she would go back to work fighting for them. But tonight, she was here with her family, and that was enough. "I need to tell you something," Catherine said as she turned back to Adrian. "The medical tests show that the genetic modifications are stable and won't cause health problems. But they're also permanent and will be passed to any future children." Adrian's eyes widened slightly as he understood what she was saying. "Are you pregnant?" "Not yet," Catherine said with a small smile. "But I'd like to be someday. Is that okay with you?" Adrian stood and wrapped his arms around her. "More than okay. Lucas would love a sibling." They held each other as the city lights glittered below and the stars shone above. Catherine had been lost and broken and transformed against her will. But she had found her way home through the love of a child who refused to give up, and the determination of people who believed impossible things could be overcome. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not superior technology or military might, but the simple, stubborn belief. Lisa Grant stood in the security center watching multiple displays that showed every angle of Adrian's estate. Her team of 20 trained operatives were positioned at strategic points throughout the compound, and all defensive systems were online. The former military commander had fought in 3 different conflicts during humanity's integration into the Galactic Coalition, and she knew how to read the signs of an approaching attack. Those signs were everywhere. Now, Commander, we have unknown aircraft approaching. From the northeast, reported Jake Chen from his monitoring station. 3 vehicles moving in formation at high speed. IFF transponders, Lisa asked, though she already knew the answer. Negative, Jake confirmed. They're running dark and ignoring our hails. Lisa activated the estate's energy shields and felt the deep hum as they powered up to full strength. The shields were a hybrid design that combined human engineering with reverse-engineered alien technology. They could stop most conventional weapons and even some directed energy attacks. All teams to defensive positions, Lisa ordered through the communication system. We have incoming hostiles. Rules of engagement are weapons free once they enter the perimeter. Adrian heard the alert in the medical bay and his blood ran cold. The Krev were here. He looked through the window at Catherine, who was just beginning to wake from the procedure. They needed more time, but time was the one thing they didn't have. Get her to the secure bunker, Adrian told Dr. Helen Rivera urgently. She's not stable enough to move, Helen protested. The procedure just finished and her neural pathways are still integrating. Moving her now could cause serious damage. If we don't move her, the Krev will kill her, Adrian shot back. Before they could argue further, explosions shook the building as the attacking aircraft opened fire on the estate's outer defenses. The energy shields flared bright blue as they absorbed the impacts, but Lisa's team could see on their sensors that these were just probing attacks. The real assault was coming. The 3 aircraft split up and began circling the compound while deploying armed figures who dropped toward the ground using personal flight systems. Lisa counted at least 15 hostiles in the first wave and knew there would be more. Engage at will, she ordered as the attackers entered weapons range. The estate's automated defense turrets opened, fire with rapid pulse weapons that lit up the early evening sky. 2 of the attackers were hit immediately and fell from the sky smoking. But the others adjusted their approach and began using evasive maneuvers that showed professional military training. Lisa's ground teams opened fire as the first hostiles landed inside the perimeter. The security operatives were well-trained and well-equipped with weapons that combined human ballistics with alien energy technology. But the Krev mercenaries had come prepared with armor and shields of their own. The battle quickly became brutal and chaotic. In the medical bay, Catherine's eyes fluttered open and for a moment she seemed confused about where she was. Then her memories flooded back and her face went through a rapid series of emotions as she processed everything that had happened. Fear and anger and grief washed over her features before settling into determined focus. Adrian, she whispered, and her voice was hoarse from hours of the procedure. Adrian rushed to her side and took her hand. Even after 3 years and all the changes her appearance had undergone, touching her felt like coming home. I'm here, he said softly. You're safe. Another explosion rocked the building and Catherine's eyes sharpened with sudden understanding. The Krev found me, she stated rather than asked. Yes, Adrian confirmed. But we're not going to let them take you again. Catherine tried to sit up, but her body was weak from the extended procedure. Dr. Helen Rivera gently pushed her back down. You need to rest, the doctor insisted. Your brain has been through a massive reorganization. No time, Catherine said as she forced herself upright despite the doctor's protests. Her mind was working at superhuman speeds now, as the integrated Zetherian modifications enhanced her cognitive abilities. She could process the tactical situation by analyzing sounds and vibrations from the battle outside. She turned to Adrian with absolute clarity in her eyes. How many hostiles and what's our defensive strength? Adrian was momentarily stunned by the change in her. This was not the confused homeless woman or even the diplomat he had married. This was something new forged from suffering and alien technology. Lisa says at least 15 attackers in the first wave, he reported. We have 20 security personnel and automated defenses. Catherine's enhanced mind ran calculations instantly. The Krev fight efficiently, but they underestimate human unpredictability. Where is Lucas? Safe in the residential bunker with 2 guards. Adrian assured her. Catherine stood on shaky legs and walked to a computer terminal. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface as she accessed the security systems. Dr. Helen Rivera started to object, but Adrian held up his hand to stop her. He recognized the look in Catherine's eyes and knew better than to argue. "The Krev are using a standard assault pattern," Catherine said as she studied the defensive displays. 3 teams of 5 with the aircraft providing fire support. They'll try to breach the main building here and here while a 3rd team secures their extraction point. Lisa Grant's voice came through the communication system. "We're holding the perimeter, but they're pushing hard on the east entrance. These guys are professionals." Catherine activated the communication channel. "Commander Grant, this is Catherine Chen. I have tactical command." There was a brief pause before Lisa responded. "Ma'am, you're supposed to be in medical." "Change of plans," Catherine said calmly. "The east entrance is a feint. They want you to commit resources there, while they breach through the underground maintenance access. Send 3 teams to the lower levels now." "How do you know that?" Lisa asked even as she began redirecting her personnel. "Because that's what I would do," Catherine replied, "and the Krev trained me for 3 years even if they didn't intend to." Adrian watched in amazement as his wife took control of the defensive operation. The procedure had not just restored her memories, but had given her the ability to analyze situations with incredible speed. She could see patterns and anticipate moves that would normally require advanced computer modeling. Lisa's teams reached the lower levels just as Krev mercenaries were cutting through the maintenance access door. The ambush was devastating and 3 hostiles went down before they could react. The remaining attackers retreated in confusion because their supposedly secret approach had been anticipated. "East team disengage and fall back to secondary positions," Catherine ordered. "Let them breach but funnel them into Kill Zone 7. Lisa immediately understood the strategy and repositioned her forces. The Krev mercenaries at the east entrance thought they were winning as the defenders fell back. They pushed forward aggressively right into a prepared crossfire that cut down 4 more hostiles. The Krev commander realized too late that they had lost the initiative. These weren't soft corporate security guards. They were highly trained operatives being directed by someone who understood Krev tactics better than the Krev themselves. "Aircraft are pulling back," Jake Chen reported from the security center. "I think they're considering retreat." "Don't let them," Catherine said sharply. "Target the lead aircraft's port engine. They'll go down controlled but won't be able to leave." Lisa's anti-aircraft systems locked onto the specified target and fired a concentrated burst. The lead aircraft shuddered as its engine exploded and began an emergency landing sequence. The other 2 aircraft hesitated, and that moment of uncertainty cost them. "All units full assault," Catherine ordered. "Drive them back to their landing zone and cut off retreat." The human defenders surged forward with renewed aggression. The Krev mercenaries found themselves on the defensive as their carefully planned assault turned into a chaotic rout. Several threw down their weapons and surrendered, while others tried to fight their way back to their damaged aircraft. Within minutes, the battle was over. 10 Krev mercenaries were dead and 5 were captured. The human defenders had 3 wounded, but no fatalities. It was a devastating defeat for an organization that had terrorized victims across multiple star systems. Catherine slumped in her chair as the adrenaline faded and her exhausted body reminded her that she had just undergone major neural surgery. Adrian caught her before she could fall and held her close. "You just commanded a military operation from a medical bay," he said with wonder in his voice. "Had to protect our son," Catherine replied simply. Then her eyes widened with sudden desperate need. "Lucas, I need to see Lucas." Adrian helped her walk to the residential bunker where their son waited with his guards. When the door opened, Lucas looked up and his face lit with pure joy. "Mommy!" he cried and ran into her arms. Catherine fell to her knees and held her child for the first time in 3 years. Tears streamed down her face as Lucas hugged her tight and kept repeating, "I knew it was you. I knew it." For that perfect moment, nothing else mattered. Not the battle or the conspiracy or the impossible technology. Just a mother holding her son and feeling whole again after being broken for so long.